On his birthday, his grandfather leaned over with a gentle smile and asked, "Did you like the car I sent you last year?" Julian Carter froze. What car? There had never been a car. Not last year, not any year, not a single birthday had passed where he truly received something meaningful from his family. And yet, here was Antonio, the only person who had ever made him feel human, asking about a gift that simply never arrived. Julian blinked hard, holding in the wave of emotions that had become second nature. Growing up, Julian was the quiet one, not because he didn't have anything to say, but because everything he was soft-spoken, emotional, different was treated like a flaw. His father Jaime didn't say much, but when he did, it landed like stone. "Don't be so dramatic. Why are you walking like that? Boys don't cry. Julian." His mother Margarita followed suit, always comparing him to Esteban, Julian's younger brother, the golden child, the family's pride. Esteban was the athlete, the loud one, the one who brought trophies and attention. Julian, on the other hand, brought discomfort. His voice, too light. His walk, too careful. His presence, always somehow wrong. And when he tried to speak, tried to explain the way he felt about school, about boys, about just wanting to be seen, he was told, "Stop being so sensitive. You're not a girl." He never told them he was gay. He didn't have to. They had already decided what he was worth. But every summer, Julian got a break from the judgment. His grandfather Antonio would invite him to stay for a few weeks. They'd drink orange juice on the porch, talk about books, draw silly comics together. And every time Julian seemed unsure of himself, Antonio would say something that melted the walls he had learned to build so young. "You have the right to be different. You hear me, that's not a burden. That's your light." But summer always ended. And the moment Julian stepped back into that house, that warmth disappeared. After high school, things got colder. Julian asked for help to attend college. His parents said no. "Esteban's starting his business. He needs our support more." So Julian found a retail job, folding shirts and managing stock. Minimum wage, long hours, sore feet, and fake smiles. Esteban, meanwhile, posted photos from Ibiza, flexed his sneakers, and mentioned family money every time someone asked how he afforded it. Julian never asked questions. He knew better. He bottled every suspicion, every quiet betrayal, and turned them into silence. He rented a small room above a laundromat and saved every penny. No holidays, no trips, just survival. And still he called home on birthdays. He never expected much, just a voice, a moment, anything. But each year was the same an awkward meal, a basic cake, and eyes that barely met his. They gave him nothing, not even a reason to hope. The older he got, the clearer it became he wasn't just forgotten. He was excluded. But Julian never stopped loving them, even when it hurt. On his 23rd birthday, he sat alone in his room. There was no gift, not even a call from Esteban. That night, he whispered to no one, "I don't need a party. I don't need balloons. Just once. I wish I mattered enough to be remembered." He didn't expect a miracle. And yet, one had already been sent. He just didn't know it had been stolen before it ever reached him. If this story touched you even a little, don't forget to follow Heart Story, where unheard voices find a place to speak, and truth always gets the final word. On Julian's 23rd birthday, something strange happened. There was a cake, a real one, not store-bought with smeared writing, not a last-minute grocery discount tray. It was neatly decorated, with his name spelled correctly. It came with quiet smiles and a camera flash. His mother even said, "Your grandfather sent this." It should have meant something. It should have felt like warmth, but instead it tasted hollow. No call from Antonio, no handwritten card, just a box of sweetness handed off like an obligation. They sang the birthday song out of tune. Esteban barely clapped. His father didn't even look up from his phone. The whole thing lasted less than 5 minutes. Julian smiled through it, pretending it mattered. He told himself it was fine. It was more than he got the year before, but something about it didn't sit right. A few days later, Julian noticed something else. The house was changing. His mother came home with new handbags, real designer brands. Esteban flashed a pair of pristine sneakers with the tags still on. There was a new speaker system in the living room. A week after that, they posted photos from a luxury resort, cocktails in hand, pool in the background. Julian hadn't been invited. He hadn't even heard they were leaving town. When he asked, his father said, "You're grown now, Julian. Go to work. No one's going to babysit you." He nodded, said nothing, but the ache inside him began to sharpen. One evening, during a family dinner, Esteban leaned back in his chair, a smirk on his face. "You know," he said, "I don't get how folding shirts is a career. I mean, come on, man, maybe do something respectable." Julian didn't reply. He kept cutting his food, bite by bite, swallowing not just the chicken, but the shame. He'd heard worse. He'd been ignored longer. But tonight, the silence hurt more, because he was starting to suspect something. The cake, the trip, the luxury, it wasn't theirs. Not really. Julian remembered how Antonio had always been generous, but careful. He would never send money blindly, never fund a vacation when Julian couldn't afford tuition. And yet, here was a family that had never cared for him, now dripping in comfort. Days after a birthday gift that came without love, the dots were connecting. Julian didn't have proof, just instinct, just that quiet warning in his chest, the same one that had protected him since childhood. He didn't ask, he didn't accuse, but the silence became heavy. His presence in the house felt even thinner than before, a placeholder, a reminder of everything they didn't want to acknowledge. And still, he stayed, not because he belonged, but because leaving would mean giving up on the hope that maybe one day someone would choose him. He worked longer shifts, took on weekend hours, sent polite texts that were left unread, and in the quiet of his apartment, he stared at the unopened cake box he'd taken home from that empty birthday. It sat in his fridge for a week, then he threw it away. It was never really his. Julian didn't expect much from his 24th birthday. He expected silence. Maybe a message from work. Possibly another cake from his mother, signed in someone else's name. But that morning, his phone buzzed with a name he hadn't seen in a long time, Antonio. Not a text, a call. "I'm in town," the voice said, steady and warm, like it had always been. "I'd like to take you out to dinner." Julian nearly dropped his phone. It had been years since he'd seen his grandfather in person. Antonio had moved to Europe a while back. They still spoke on and off, but time and distance made even love feel far away. Now he was back. That evening, Julian arrived at a quiet Italian restaurant his grandfather had chosen. Not fancy, but warm, familiar. Antonio greeted him with arms wide open and eyes that still saw him, really saw him in a way no one else did. Julian felt something loosen in his chest. As they ate, he laughed more than he had in months. They talked about books, about the shop Julian worked at, about life. It felt real again, like he was home, even if just for a night. Then dessert came, and with it, the question. Antonio set down his spoon, looked up with that same calm, trusting gaze, and asked Julian, "Did you like the sports car I sent you last year?" The room tilted. Julian blinked. "What car?" he asked. Slowly, Antonio's face fell. "The silver coupe, custom leather seats. I had it delivered to your address. Margarita told me you loved it." Julian's mouth went dry. He remembered the cake, the forced song, the way they'd said, "Your grandfather sent this." He had believed it, wanted to believe it, but there had never been a car, not even a mention. Antonio leaned back, his voice firmer now. "Julian, I never sent you a cake. I sent you a car. I even called the dealership. They said it was delivered and signed for." Julian couldn't speak. The silence at the table stretched long, tight. Then his mother, sitting across from them, invited by Antonio for the dinner, cleared her throat. "There must have been a delivery issue," she said, her voice uneven. His father didn't speak. Antonio's eyes narrowed. "A delivery issue?" She hesitated. Then, slowly, almost defiantly, she said it. "We sold it. Esteban needed the money. He was trying to launch his brand. We thought you'd understand." Julian's hands trembled. The cutlery clinked as his fingers curled tight. "You thought I'd understand." His voice cracked. "You thought I'd be fine, with you stealing from me." His mother glanced away. His father looked down. Esteban scrolled through his phone like none of it mattered. Julian stood up. He had spent years swallowing his place at the bottom, accepting the scraps, pretending it didn't burn every time they passed him over for someone louder, more acceptable. But this was theft, not just of a car, but of his dignity. His belief that maybe, just maybe, someone in that house had ever loved him without conditions. Antonio stood too, the chair scraping behind him. His voice didn't rise, but every word hit like thunder. "No more. I'm cutting you off. All of you." He turned to Julian. "You're coming with me. Tonight, Dunda. You don't belong at that table anymore." Julian's chest rose and fell. His face burned, not from shame, but from something new, something like light. He didn't say goodbye. He just followed the only person who had ever called him family and meant it. That night, Julian left everything behind. The house where no one listened, the family dinners filled with silence, the weight of a last name that had never protected him. He packed nothing. He had nothing to pack. Antonio took him to a hotel for the night. Just a quiet room with 2 beds and warm lighting. Julian sat by the window in silence while his grandfather called room service. He brought him tea with honey, like he used to do in the summers. They didn't speak much. They didn't have to. The next morning, they boarded a flight to Amsterdam. Antonio's home stood just outside the city, surrounded by still water and tall trees. It was a white villa, sun-drenched and calm, with a gravel path leading to a garage that looked more like a gallery. Inside were sports cars, vintage classics, and something else, a silver coupe. Sleek, elegant, untouched. The car meant for Julian. Antonio opened the door and handed him the keys. "It waited for you," he said simply. Julian's hands trembled again, not from anger this time, but from the ache of finally being seen. They sat together in the garden later that day. A soft breeze moved through the hedges. Julian looked at his grandfather and asked the question that had been lodged in his chest since the flight. "Why didn't you ever say anything about them? About how they treated me?" Antonio's gaze didn't shift. "Because I thought the money would be enough. I thought they'd use it to lift you. I never imagined they would use it to bury you." Then quietly he added, "And because I knew your pain too well." Julian turned toward him. Antonio had never spoken about his own past. He had always been private, careful with details. But that afternoon, under a pale blue sky, the words came, "When I was your age, I loved a man named Willem. He was kind, steady, brilliant, but I didn't have your courage. I let the world shame me out of it. I married your grandmother. I did what was expected." Willem moved away. He died a year before I finally said the words out loud. He paused. "I lost the only person who truly loved me because I waited too long to be honest with myself." Julian felt a wave rise in his chest. He'd spent his whole life hiding, folding himself smaller just to fit into spaces that were never built for him. But here was the only person who had ever stood by him, revealing a part of his story that mirrored Julian's in silence and fear. He didn't hesitate. "I'm gay," Julian said, not as a confession, but as a truth finally freed. Antonio didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He only smiled. "I've always known," he said, "and I've always been proud." They sat there for a while. No more secrets, no more shame. In the weeks that followed, Julian moved into Antonio's guest house. It was bright, modern, and filled with books. The silver coupe stayed parked outside, gleaming in the afternoon light. Antonio introduced him to colleagues at a design firm in the city, a place where creativity was currency and no one asked him to hide. He didn't walk in as someone's shadow. He walked in as Julian Carter, a man who had nothing to prove but everything to give. He wasn't just starting a new life. He was reclaiming the one that had been stolen piece by people who never deserved to hold it. And now, finally, he had a future that felt like his. Julian had almost forgotten the sound of their voices. Weeks had passed since the night Antonio pulled him away from the dinner table that had never fed his soul. Since then, every day felt like breathing without weight. He worked, he walked, he read, he laughed. For the first time in years, he wasn't performing his existence. Then the phone calls began. At first, it was his mother. Her voice cracked, laced with panic. "Julian, please, your father and I, we lost the house, the bank. It's gone. We didn't know this would happen." Next came Esteban. "Look, man, I messed up. All right, I was young. I needed help, but I'm trying to find work now. I've changed." Then his father, stern as always, but shaken. "I'm still your father, Julian. That must mean something. You can't just shut us out." Julian listened to every voicemail, every plea, every justification wrapped in desperation. They didn't mention the car, or the years, or the silence they'd weaponized against him. They only spoke of now, of need, of being family. Family. Julian stood at the window of the villa in Amsterdam, holding his phone, staring at the garden where he and Antonio had planted lavender the week before. The scent still lingered on his fingertips. He pressed the speakerphone button. The three of them were on a joint call now. Overlapping voices. "We're sorry. We were wrong. You're still blood." Julian's reply was calm. Final. "No, family doesn't steal from their own." He ended the call, and this time he didn't cry. He didn't need to. Later that night, Antonio found him in the study, flipping through old photographs. A boy with quiet eyes, a grandfather holding him steady. No one else in the frame. "You did the right thing," Antonio said softly. Julian nodded. "I don't hate them. I just don't owe them anything anymore." Antonio placed a hand on his shoulder. "From now on, you get to choose who your family is." A week later, Julian moved into his own apartment, a modest flat not far from the canals. On the hallway wall, he hung two things: a framed photo of him as a child beside Antonio on a summer porch, and a small metal plaque that read, "To love without conditions." But the story didn't end there. One evening, Antonio invited Julian to join him at his lawyer's office. It was a simple meeting, just paperwork, signatures, documents that meant little to Julian at first, until the final page. Antonio smiled. "You won't be surprised by this," he said, "but I changed my will 3 years ago, back when they started lying to me. You've been my heir ever since." Julian couldn't speak, not because of the money, or the house, or the cars, but because someone had chosen him fully, quietly, and without requirement, long before he had learned to choose himself. Everything they tried to keep from him was already his. Not because he fought for it, but because someone had seen him and believed he was enough. Julian Carter was no longer the forgotten son. He was living proof that love doesn't require approval, and that sometimes the truest family is the one who picks you back up after the ones who raised you let you fall. Have you ever had to walk away from the people who were supposed to love you? Tell us your story below. Someone out there might need to hear it. Subscribe to Heart Story, where every scar becomes a story, and every story has the power to heal.